Janet's an expert in organizational behavior. She's been chairman of our management department, and now is our senior associate dean. Her research is in the area, one of her areas of research is in the area of ethics. She's done quite a few papers on it and different things, but really brings an expertise. And I know this very well because Janet and I co-teach a class on organizational corruption and control, which is one of our new signature classes for freshmen. So I've seen and learned an awful lot working with her. So I'm going to turn it over to Janet and let her start.
Okay, well, thank you very much for being here, and welcome to UT and Holmes and to this conference, and I think we'll have a lot of fun. So my instructions were to be relatively brief, to tell you, and that shouldn't be a problem, because we really want to get a lot of discussion. So what I'm going to do is to tell you a bit about what we know about the trust, how to build it, and then just generate a lot of discussion in terms of your experiences in your organizations about trust. How can be built? How what are more problematic issues about building trust in the organization, etc. Okay, so hopefully we'll have a lively discussion. I'm going to talk a little bit about some interesting trends that we've seen in organization. So, 59% of all 2001 web purchases made in the U.S. were done at the workplace. 47% of employees spend at least a half an hour a day cruising the web for personal reasons. 30 to 40% of employee internet activity is for personal reasons. And 70% of internet porn traffic occurs during workday hours. Now, we don't know if it's done at the workplace, but it's suspicious given that it's during 8 to 5. Okay? So, what are companies doing about this rampant waste of time at work? 60% of employers use software to monitor incoming and outgoing email, and 25% had terminated an employee for violating the company's email policy. 76% monitor an employee's website connections. 65% use software to block connections to some sites. And then 26% fired employees for misusing the internet. Now, I know at the University of Texas, pretty much every computer is monitored very closely. So, we feel watched all the time. Now, you may say, okay, at first blush, I think this is good. We need to watch every keystroke of every single employee who is at the job. And I might agree with you in terms of porn, but we might want to think about what's the problem of this excessive monitoring in terms of what employees are doing at the workplace. Well, and these are really this. It is a very good article about this, and I'm just rampantly stealing from Pfeffer, who wrote an article in HBR. What Pfeffer argues is that this excessive monitoring of this traffic that can go on during the workplace potentially can lead to increased absenteeism. Most families now, most two-person families have work. So we don't see many stay-at-home moms anymore. And often now, especially in the current environment, many people have more than one job, which means that there's not a lot of time to get important personal work done. So if we don't allow some of this, whether it's banking or purchasing or whatever done during the workplace hours, then we may see increased absenteeism as people take time off in order to get some of these activities done. Okay. We also find that people report a lot of increased stress as a result of being monitored. and knowing that they're being monitored, which potentially can lead to decreased motivation at work. We also find is a phenomenon that's called psychological reactance, in which when people are told that they can't do something, that something sometimes can become much more enticing than it ordinarily would be. So, imagine, when you get on a plane, soon as that seatbelt sign goes on, suddenly you have to go to the restroom. And similarly, the fact that, no longer are you allowed to send personal emails or cruise on the web, by virtue of prohibiting it, it may make it more attractive than it ordinarily was. Okay. Also, what we find is that, the self-fulfilling prophecy may occur. The research indicates that when we believe, for instance, and label someone as smart, we react toward them in such a way that, that we believe that they are smarter, and we encourage behavior so that they actually become smarter. Similarly, there's what's been called the Golem Effect, that if we label someone as inferior, that we act toward them in ways that encourages that inferior behavior. So what Pfeffer argues is that if we label employees as potentially dishonest and stealing, precious company time, that we may act toward them in such a way that fulfills that prophecy. And there's been some really fascinating research which suggests that this increased surveillance may actually lead supervisors to set up entrapment. So set up opportunities to try to, trick employees to, almost justify the increased surveillance that's been put in place and lead them to commit these so-called crimes. And then finally, you just really can't create a climate of trust when you have these types of situations. So there was a very neat experiment that was done in which supervisors were asked to, observe multiple employees, and one of them they were told was, they were supposed to watch very closely. And even though the employees performed identically, the one that they were told to monitor more closely, they reported lower levels of trust. And they thought that they were, less, really didn't perform as well. So this increased monitoring has some costs, and it has some costs in particular in terms of trust. So we can ask ourselves, what does it feel like to work in a low trust environment? Well, people report that it's very stressful, it feels very threatening, it's very divisive, unproductive, intense. As opposed to in a high trust environment, it's fun, feels supportive, motivating, productive, and comfortable. So we can ask ourselves then, what is trust? Well, I guess I was cruising on the internet. I pulled this definition. Hopefully my employer thinks I was actually working. This is from Merriam-Webster's online dictionary. Assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something. Another definition, confident reliance on someone when you are in a position of vulnerability. And I think this is really applicable when we think about trust in a workplace setting, because oftentimes, our employees are in vulnerable situations, and that they rely on their supervisors for a variety of things. All right, components of trust. We can break trust out into three basic components. There's strategic trust, which relates to the amount of trust that members of the organization have in terms of how they think that the top management of the organization has a clear vision, of what the organization is doing and is adequately deploying the resources of that organization in order to achieve that vision. All right, so do the people who are at the top of this organization, do they know where we're going, and do they know how we're going to get there? That's basically strategic trust. Personal trust refers to kind of that more intimate relationship between an employee and his or her direct supervisor. So can I believe that the person to whom I report acts in my best interest? Or are they going to undercut me, or retaliate against me? And finally, organizational trust refers to, is there a belief that the organization uses fair processes when promotion decisions or merit-based decisions are made in the organization? Okay, and I'm going to come back to that because that's a really important thing. All right, what are some enemies of trust? All right, inconsistent messages. So, saying on the one side, you're really important here, and then on the other side, what's your name again? I get a great example of this. And most of what happens with inconsistency is just not paying attention. We, at the university, we have two basic classes of faculty. On the one hand, we have what are called tenured faculty. So these are people who are basically engage in research and teaching. And then in addition to our tenure track faculty, we hire lecturers who kind of pinch hit for us. They'll come in who teach as needed. Okay, but they don't engage in the research mission of the university. But they're very valued, and we think of them as very valued because they contribute to the teaching mission of the university. But sometimes they often will feel like second-class citizens because they don't contribute to the research part of the mission of the university. Now, we don't ever want to say to their face, "Oh, you're second-class citizens," but subtly, I think we do that. So, for instance, one of the ways I had a meeting with them, and they said, "Well, you, not me personally, but you as a tenure track faculty, make us feel as second-class citizens because, at the very first fall faculty meeting, you only introduced the new tenure track faculty meetings who were hired, and you didn't introduce the new lecturers who were hired." That's a great example. I mean, I don't think, it was in anyone's mind of, oh, we're going to, crush these people into the ground and make them feel like dirt. But that was an inadvertent way in which, and that it destroys trust in the organization of saying, I'm just not very important here. So, as managers, we have to constantly be thinking of the symbolic natures of our actions, because that has a direct impact on how people feel, is this a trusting place here? Can I trust that, I'm going to be valued in this organization? All right, another enemy of trust, inconsistent standards. So, and we often see this, there's this, say superstar in the organization, and, maybe we'll bend the rules for this person a little bit. People are hyper-vigilant in organizations, and they're constantly watching. And so if they notice that someone is getting an extra perk that someone else isn't for unfair reasons, that's going to destroy trust. Misplaced benevolence. I think this is a really important one. It's very easy for us to, let's just ignore the fact that we've got Joe over there, and Joe is really not very good, but it's too much work to get rid of him. So we'll kind of just park Joe in the little basement office and give him some meaningless tasks to do, because it's easier just to let him just sit there as opposed to go through the whole process of trying to terminate him. Well, it may be easier for you as the manager to do that, but it has a really very undercutting effect on the rest of the organization, because all of your good performers are sitting there going, yeah, Joe is drawing down a paycheck. You know, and you know, is this really a good utilization of resources? Or, you know, there's some members of the organization, I'm sure, I know I experience this, and maybe you do as well, who are perhaps competent, but mean. They're just nasty people. And so we just kind of, and these are the type of people really, you know, that you can't put them on teams because they, you know, they don't work, they don't play nice. So again, you know, rather than dealing with them directly, we just try to ignore the problem. And this destroys trust as well. So not dealing with problematic employees, another enemy of trust. Elephants in the park. Ignoring politically charged situations. So imagine, for instance, let's say someone has been fired in the organization. You may not in that situation, you know, be able to legally or for whatever reason disclose all of the gory details. But not talking about it at all, leads to problems. And that's closely related to the next one, which is, you know, when there are rumors that are circulating in the organization. Let's say that, you know, there's potential layoff that's going to occur, not talking about it at all. You know, what we find is, you know, when there's an absence of information, people rush to fill it. And, you know, they'll make things up because, you know, in general, it's just a factor of human nature. We don't like to deal with uncertainty. So we'll just make things up in order to, you know, kind of reduce our uncertainty. One of the classes that I used to teach utilized a behavioral simulation in which the students would assume the top management team position. And so in one of the simulations, it was great. You know, start out, they run the organization for a full day. And they, you know, the positions are from the president down to vice president levels. So imagine a room of 14, these are MBA students, and they're running around and they're making decisions. And the president and the COO get together at about 8:45 in the morning, and they're making a decision about how to restructure this organization. And they whisper. And everyone's looking around, and then they write. They write. Big announcement. 10 o'clock. Oh. And then they don't say anything more than that. No one does any work from 8:45 until 10 o'clock. They're all going, and they're moving around, they're getting into little coffee clans, and this was a simulation. But you know, I'm sure, that this happens in your organization all the time. So, you know, when something's going to, now, you know, when we talked about this afterward of, you know, well, how could you have better handled this? I mean, saying, you know, and again, even if you say, I don't know what's going to happen, you know, it's better than, you know, hiding it. You know, so you may say, all right, we know that there may be some layoffs. We don't know the full extent. You know, at least having some open chains of communication will go an enormously long way, as opposed to just not talking at all. Because if you don't talk at all, believe me, you'll have some employees who will pretend that they have some cherished information and will act as though it's the truth. And that can just be horrible. Okay, so why is organizational trust so important. And it's interesting, Cynthia alluded to this in her talk as well. This comes from the 2007 National Business Ethics Survey. So 54% of employees who did not report misconduct that they observed in the workplace were skeptical that their report would make a difference. You know, and in this report, it was interesting. It's not that they necessarily felt that they would be retaliated against. It's just they didn't think it would make a difference. They didn't think that that someone would that there would be retribution. It just, no one would care. Why bother? So, this personal trust in the manager isn't enough. What seems to make a difference is organizational trust. That the organization is actually going to act upon the information, and that the organization has fair procedures, which is really part of this ethical climate that we're talking about. So, it's not just having that personal trust in my manager, because that's really what we're talking about when we're thinking about, well, is there going to be any retribution if I blow the whistle? But that's just not enough. I really have to believe that my organization has processes and procedures that will make a difference in order for me to do something. So what influences fair procedures? Okay. We can think about organizational trust as having kind of two components. We think about distributive versus procedural trust. Distributive processes refer to outcomes, whether we're getting just outcomes, just or fair outcomes versus the process itself. And we like to differentiate those because while the former is important, having outcomes that I think are fair is important, what we find from the research is that the process is even more important. So I like to make sure that what I'm getting is fair, but how I am getting it is even more important to me. So there's a great story about a woman who gets a ticket for supposedly running a red light, but the light actually wasn't red. So she decides she's going to protest it, and so she's waiting for a day in court. She's got her evidence, she's got a witness. So, no, the light wasn't red. It just was grossly unfair. She got this ticket. So she gets in front of the judge, and the judge says, I'm waiving the ticket. She goes, well, wait, I want to tell my story. No, I'm just waiving it. Now, when this is a case of distributive justice, she got a fair outcome because she hadn't run the red light, and so the outcome was fair for her, but she went away saying, wait a minute, it wasn't procedural justice for her because she didn't get to say why should she get that outcome. So even though she didn't have to pay the ticket, so she should have been just thrilled, right? But she wasn't. So what we find is that you can get all the rewards that you think you deserve, but if you don't get them fairly, that you don't feel as good as you might. So this procedural justice is very important to employees. So how do we get through this? Well, in part, it's engagement. It's including people in the decision-making process. By including people, by having people give some input in terms of, for instance, how decisions are made, people will understand the rationale for the decisions, as well as will feel more committed to it. Explaining the rationale for the decisions, how rewards are being allocated, how promotions are being made, what's the basis for it. If we're changing something in the organization, if we're putting in new compliances, new rules, you know, what's the reason for them, so they don't just seem arbitrary. That goes a long way. So it's really having an extensive communication system in the organization. You know, it's amazing to me that if you look at organizations tend to do a much better job explaining to the outside world. You know, so they have PR departments that focus on explaining what the organization does to its external constituencies, and often forgets, you know, you have internal constituents. You have your employees. And, you know, we often just forget, you know, to explain, well, what are we doing internally? You should have an internal PR department who just focuses on your employees and explains, you know, okay, we have a change now in, you know, our healthcare benefits. You know, why did this happen? You know, because, you know, so that employees don't feel as though, well, you know, this organization doesn't care about me. And then finally, expectation clarity. So let's say something does change. Let's say, you know, now we are changing the way in which we are evaluating employees, that, you know, we have to be very clear that they understand how the rules of the game have changed. So that, you know, they don't feel as though it's arbitrary in terms of their performance. Okay, all right, so I said I would be short enough so that we can talk. So what I wanted to pose to you was, in your experience, what were some of the factors that kind of erode trust? What are some, you know, crises that have a big impact on trust? And then the second part of that is, you know, when these occur, then how can we recover? So how can we rebuild trust? So those are the kind of the two things that I wanted to talk about. So I've talked enough. It's your turn. Okay, don't talk all at once, then I can wait here a long time.
Leadership.
Yeah.
Our company is 85 years old. It's a family-owned business. On January 1, 2008, it was split among the two grandsons who now are presidents of two separate companies.
Okay.
And this was rumored for 18 months, perhaps about 6 months prior to it taking place finally. The
Okay.
two presidents brought their employees together and made the announcement.
Okay. So what, in that sense, what, you know, so we're talking about a split. So what were people doing during this time?
Lots of talk, no facts, lots of what ifs. And just a week ago, Monday, one of the companies moved physically away from the corporate headquarters. And now we have our own building, and things are much better. The people have settled down, they're calmer,
Okay.
and they're really concentrating on work.
Okay. What do you think could have been done differently that would have helped?
The upfront announcement to the
Upfront.
employees.
Okay. 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 All right. Someone said, yeah.
The regular shifting of senior management, it happens in state government about every 3 or 4 years to get new leadership in, and then soon you'll see that they start bringing in people that they had working for them to take over positions, and sometimes it's a political appointment, sometimes it's just a changeover. It's done through even legislative pressure or what have you.
Okay.
And then at that point, everyone down below is kind of watching very carefully to see the new people coming in and where the camps are and where the strength is, and who's going to survive the change and who's not, who's on shaky ground. It all really is a turmoil.
Yeah. That's good. I did some research for the Navy, and you know they talked about, because you know their commanders routinely rotate. So, you know, you kind of felt sorry for the commanders because they'd have these great initiatives, but all the people underneath them, you know, said, well, why should we do anything? Because you're gonna be rotated out in 2 years. So, yeah, good idea. Fabulous idea. We're not doing anything. It's hilarious. I'm easily amused, as you can tell. I have to do my job. Okay, what else?
I think what the gentleman just described is something that's taking place right here in Austin in our local government, and the changing city manager and coming from Fort Worth and bringing in those who need our trust in to take over positions from the former city manager. But I think that's a very good analogy. Another thing, I'm now with UT, used to be with the city of Austin, city of Austin. And just prior to coming here, I transferred to another department, and it sounded like with your examples that you basically were looking into our department because you had one employee who wasn't doing anything, who was trying to, you had the management who did not disseminate information in a timely fashion. You had the rumor mill going around, and so being on the inside of that was very bizarre to me because I was never in an organization as such, and thus gone out.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, it definitely opened my eyes to how much trust is a factor, and you just came in and were reading the Stream of Trust, so
Oh.
it's very kind.
Okay. All right. So what else can destroy trust? Yeah, but did you have a sense that the university was worse than, or do you think it was idiosyncratic to that department, or?
I can't really speak on the university just that, because I've only been here for 2 weeks, so. But in that department, it was crisis every day because things were changing.
But I think that's, you know, if you have constant change, you know, I think that's where you see, you know, it's really difficult to kind of build this climate of trust because it's hard to kind of keep up with, you know, all the rumors that are going to happen, and you know, it's just, you have this tremendous amount of uncertainty. It's just really hard to keep up with this. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest problems is the exploitation of vulnerabilities.
Okay.
I see that a lot in various organizations. I've seen it in the military, and I've also seen it in just in our organization. And it destroys, you know, the leader, the guy who gets ahead by doing this ends up with an entirely dysfunctional team beneath him.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So what would be an example of that?
Well, the guy who climbs over somebody, you know, takes credit,
Takes credit.
for the work that his teammate did.
Okay.
Because he can speak well, and the other guy is not as great a speaker,
Right.
and so he gets the credit when it wasn't his work. That type of thing.
Yeah, and I, you know, and I think, and you can see organizations differ in terms of their culture of allowing that, and some will reward.
Yes.
You know, it's, hey, if you're clever enough that you can steal someone's work, good for you. Whereas other organizations, you know, integrity is such an important value that would be punished. You know.
Right, but there, you know, but there's some structures that actually promote that, or you know, or allow it.
Exactly.
You know, tolerate it, I guess would be a better word.
Right. Yeah, so we can look almost on a continuum of, you know, organizations that, you know, promote it, allow it because they're just not paying attention, you know, and they're not vigilant enough, versus other organizations that, you know, would actively seek it out and punish it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. What else? You know, kind of the opposite of splitting, think of mergers, that's usually a time when you have a lot of, you know, consternation. Yeah.
There's in that they have a couple of airplanes they're trying to bring onto the market for a lot of investment that they put into it. However, the union doesn't realize that because of the economic downturn, that they're trying to prolong or to postpone deliveries of some of the airplanes because the funds that people are trying desperately out there, the airlines that want to buy those airplanes, to kind of wait, because right now we don't have the money. So it catches that you don't, the unions are not working in an area of trust with management. At the same time, management's not in an area of trust with their airlines that they're selling airplanes to. Between the multiple directions that it's pulling everyone, they're not going to go anywhere. Nothing's happening, and probably what used to be a 1-month strike is probably going to go 3 or 4 months. And a lot of people are going to get hurt. A lot of, and then the next union comes up. Their engineering union comes up next, and they're going to strike as well. So you got this real strong company that's going to be on its knees.
Certainly, I think in terms of anytime you have these labor management disputes, that you really have a lot of problems. Other examples? Yeah.
Actually, using Airlines or AIG, when you have top management going to employees and saying, we need your help, we need to make these cuts, which American did with their unions, and then they turn around and reward themselves very handsomely, which, you're asking the lower end to take cuts and to take one for the team, and then the team becomes the top management. It erodes trust real quick.
Oh, yeah.
Vulnerabilities, taking advantage.
Same thing.
Yeah, that falls in, so I think all of us could read that article about, the spa treatments for AIG officials right after, they got the bailout, yeah.
But they're gonna put them off next time. They're gonna take the next trip they had planned. That was announced yesterday.
A big one that I've seen is a reluctance to report or highlight how bad behavior is actually dealt with.
Yeah.
Fear of legal liability if you say we actually fired this person or demoted. That I've seen that because people, as you pointed out, they make it up. Next thing you know, someone's really been fired, but what they're thought of is that they got a severance package that's better than what other people have.
Yeah. It's, Ergen and I work at a state agency, so, it's really difficult to get rid of people, but even if you don't, organizations typically are very reluctant to deal with termination, even when it's just blatant. But I think we go through this incredible rationalization as to why it's okay to keep someone, and we don't think about the huge cost. But I think that's an excellent point of, when we do actually get rid of someone, there needs to be an explanation. Again, and that goes back to the elephant in the room. You don't have to go through a blow-by-blow play of, what happened. So obviously, but, because there are confidentiality issues, but just to ignore it entirely is a mistake. Because people will talk.
Yeah, I was just gonna add on to what she said. I think that what she brings up is that you've talked about personal trust and organizational trust, and I think there are other levels. Market trust, when you come to talking about your customers. And then if you take a look at the problem that our markets are in right now, it's a societal trust issue. Because nobody believes anybody.
So let's we don't have all that much time left. How do you rebuild trust? Let's say, you screwed up. And, so you need to regain the trust that has been eroded, and, we often, kind of differentiate, bad apples and bad barrels, and well, let's say we're not at the bad apple, so, you didn't erode the trust purposely. It just, it was a mistake, and, so you made the big announcement, or you said you were gonna make a big announcement, and you didn't explain why, you didn't communicate as effectively as you could, and you started the rumor mill, and now everyone's pointing fingers, and then you realize, oh my gosh, what an idiot I was. Now I need to be able to try to build trust back up in my organization. I really am well-intentioned, I just, or I did one thing. When I became department chair, I was very vigilant about giving all of my staff, giving them a little birthday card and a little trinket, candle or something. I missed one person's birthday. Oh my God. I mean, that's a killer. So because again, people go through an attribution process where they try to make sense of behavior, and they definitely do that with their manager. She's mad at me. And I didn't get this one staff member a gift. And this is after I'd been in the office for 3 years. So there had been a pattern. I took her out for lunch, so, we eventually repaired, but, it's, again, it's often well-intentioned people can make mistakes. All right, so I've set this scenario. All right, so how can we rebuild? Yes?
I think the most important thing is to admit that you made a mistake.
Okay. Okay, so boy, did I screw up. Yeah. And I did. Big time. Seemed like a little thing, but it wasn't. But yeah.
I think another thing is to do what you say you're going to do. We have a new leader in our organization who has made quite an effort to say that he is not perfect, but that he is going to do his best. And if someone sees that he has done something wrong, he has invited them to let him know so that he can correct the mistake. So now we're all really interested to know if what he said is really going to work. Is his door really that open? Who's going to be the first person to go in and try it? But I'll tell you, that first person who goes in to try it and it works, is going to tell everyone. Or if it doesn't work, it's going to tell everyone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what we call walk the talk. So I mean, it's if you say, hey, I want to have you feel free to criticize my ideas. So I'm saying, I think the new Coke formula is a good one. And, but I'm, free to, feel free to say if you don't think that's a good idea. And boy, if someone comes in and says, oh, that's not such a good idea, and I punish them, then yeah, you set the tone where you'll never have anyone speak up again. But so yes, if you say, this is how this organization is going to be, I have an open door policy, then you have to be willing to take it. Yeah, and I think that's right. Everyone will watch. Yeah. What else? How else can trust be rebuilt?
I think you take the time to learn individuals, and I'm not sure how to put it, but you made the statement that, you didn't think it was that big of a deal, but that person, it was the end of the world, so.
Yeah. It is, I think, it takes a lot of time, and I didn't mean to discount, when I talked about the 3 components of trust, the strategic trust, and then the supervisory trust at the personal level, and then organizational trust. All 3 are very important. I think organizational trust is critical. But that supervisory trust is important as well, and so and that's where you do take the time to get to to understand, you know, the people who work for you, and, you know, so that they do feel comfortable, for instance, coming to you if they see a problem in the organization, and, you know, want to, you know, say, yeah, I don't feel very comfortable with how people are, you know, this report or whatever it may be, so, and that does take time. Yeah.
I think if you're in a leadership position, you have to be perceived as extending trust to others.
Okay.
And, you know, and to do that, you probably have to have your own little analytical system that is not necessarily known to everybody else. Because to extend trust, you have to, you know, you gotta be smart about it, so you gotta think that it's, you know, you gotta have some basis for doing it, but I think your propensity to extend trust is an important element.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point, and I think that goes back to my, you know, my first couple slides. You know, if we become, you know, hyper vigilant and assume that the people in our organizations are cheats, and, you know, that they have to be watched all the time, we really aren't going to be able to establish a climate of trust. You know, so, you know, we have to have some faith that we've hired good people, and, you know, obviously we have controls in the organization. You know, one of the arguments that we've made in a paper is that, you know, over-reliance on controls can have the counterproductive effect of actually increasing corruption. So that, you know, we have to find the balance between having good control systems but not having excessive control systems. So we have to have some trust in the employees that we have in the organization that they will do the right thing. And in part, that's dependent on having a culture in the organization that emphasizes values of integrity and doing the right thing, and being willing to speak up. Now, one of the features of organizations that are very important is what we call having a feature that's called psychological safety, which is when employees feel that it's appropriate and okay to be able to report when they see something that's wrong. And not just illegal, but when they think that the organization is not making decisions that are beneficial. When they say the emperor has no clothes. When, you know, they say, you know, and when they feel that they can question even people who are higher above them, even with people with higher status. And we know that there are some organizations which, just by their nature, they're lower in psychological safety because of huge status differentials between employees. So, for instance, hospitals tend to be low in psychological safety because there are huge status differences between doctors and nurses. So doctors tend to be very high status individuals in hospitals, nurses tend to be lower status. So, you know, so how do we get a hospital which is high in psychological safety such that in the surgical room you can have a nurse feel comfortable to say to a surgeon, who often, you know, will feel as though they're God. And surgeons are trained that way. They feel as though they have godlike qualities. Because they have your life in their hands when they have you on the table. How do you create a situation where that nurse can say, doctor, I don't know if you should do that. Or doctor, I think you left something in the body. And believe me, there are cases of that. You know, so, you know, there's been some, you know, good research in terms of, you know, how we can create, you know, that atmosphere where a nurse can feel comfortable of questioning what the doctor is doing. Another situation where we see these high status differences is in cockpit crews, where again, we see, you know, the pilot tends to be the one who is very high status, and everyone else in that cockpit crew tends to be subservient. Now that one makes it more interesting because, you know, when you're talking about a nurse versus a physician, the nurse is, you know, is really dealing with someone else's life. And the cockpit crew, you know, you've got the, say, the co-pilot, it's their lives.
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, you see, you know, when you look at the black box reporters of, you know, these airline crashes, you know, and you know, I've looked at the transcript of one, you know, you hear, you know, the co-pilot going, Dan, I think maybe you should pull up, and you know, the pilot goes, oh, that's ridiculous, shut up. No, Dan, I think you should pull up, shut up. Bam! I mean, you know, I mean, and it's, why don't you alone? It's like, this is your own life. But because of, you know, the training of, you know, you don't question, you know, you can get into these, you know, very kind of subservient roles. So, you know, and again, that's how we have to, you know, think about how can we create organizations that are high in psychological safety so that people feel, you know, when they see something that's amiss, that they can question. And that they're not going to feel any retaliation. Okay, well, I'm over on my time, but thank you very much for being here, and I know we're supposed to take a break, right?
Quick break, and then
Yeah,
you
and
switch
then you guys-
rooms, the presenter stays.
I stay. Okay.